No Small Endeavor is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. What if comparing car insurance rates was as easy as putting on your favorite podcast? With Progressive, it is. Just visit the Progressive website to quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's direct rate, then their tool will provide options from other companies so you can compare. All you need to do is choose the rate and coverage you like. Quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
This is my life. I want no other. It's a better way of putting it than are you happy?
That's Stanley Hauerwas, called by Time magazine the best theologian in America. It's an ironic honor, really, because Hauerwas is one of the most outspoken critics of America. But Hauerwas, as critic, can turn the critique upon himself, too. He has always pursued honesty and integrity, and both his teaching and his own life have entailed a commitment to explore what a good life might require of us all.
So how to live in a way that you want to know the truth about yourself is a hell of a challenge.
Today, our intimate conversation and career retrospective interview.
I did not intend to be Stanley Hauerwas. I'm a person with strong convictions and hopefully strong arguments.
All coming right up. Hey friends, if you like listening to stories that teach you something, then I have a great podcast recommendation for you, Cautionary Tales, the chart-topping history podcast from Pushkin. We've all heard the saying, learn from your mistakes, but couldn't the same be true for other people's mistakes? On Cautionary Tales, you hear a treasure trove of mishaps and meltdowns that teach us all something. Each episode, Financial Times columnist Tim Harford mines the greatest fiascos of the past for their most valuable lessons. Some stories may delight you, others may scare you, but they'll all make you wiser. Like, how did efforts to control the weather go disastrously awry? Or, what's the connection between the medieval dancing plague and Havana syndrome? That and more. Don't miss out. Listen to Cautionary Tales wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lee C. Camp. This is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life. We academics, well, maybe it's more accurate to say we humans, are all dependent upon heirs of those who have gone before, those who have worked, written, argued, and taught before. Giants, both ancient and contemporary, who have grappled with the great questions of what it means to be human and what it might mean to make claims about truth or the divine or the nature of a good life. This is one of the great joys of getting to be host of No Small Endeavor, to meet and converse with such good souls. And today's guest is especially one of those giants, recognized as one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century. He's loved by many, lambasted by others, and I have learned a great deal from him myself personally, and have also found myself arguing with him, whether in my mind or in print. He's an enigma, a dogged pacifist whose profanity is most always close at hand, a stereotypical Texan who's also surprisingly tender, one who many will count a liberal, but he disavows liberalism, one who others will count conservative, but he has extreme dislike for evangelicalism. Wherever you're coming from, you're in for a disarmingly candid conversation on one man's life in his own words. That is, the life of Stanley Hauerwas. Stanley Hauerwas is a Texan and a theologian. He's one of the most known and influential still living theologians in the world. He's written loads of books. In 2001, he was named America's Best Theologian by Time magazine. He's often described as contrarian. Perhaps any such devoted Texan could not be otherwise, while at the same time committed to nonviolence, having argued in his Texan contrarianness that nonviolence is central to being a Christian. Stanley's alternately loved, oftentimes lambasted, surprisingly on occasion profane and genuinely sweet. He completed his graduate work at Yale University, spent many years teaching at Notre Dame, before teaching the last number of decades of his career at Duke. And I'm grateful to be sitting here with you, Stanley, in your office at Duke. And I've been really looking forward to this and grateful to get to be sitting with you today.
It's great to be with you, Lee.
It's a delight.
Just one thing.
Yeah.
I wasn't named America's Best Theologian. I was named the Best Theologian in America.
Best Theologian in America.
Right.
Yeah, that's quite different for you. I mean, important.
It is.
A distinction for you. Well, we'll have opportunity to talk about that. I want to start with a story that you tell in your memoir, Hannah's Child, that you became a theologian because you couldn't get saved?
Right. Yeah. I grew up in a Methodist church where you were baptized on Sunday morning, but you had to get saved on Sunday night. Pro football hadn't gotten there yet. And so Sunday night, you needed to be saved.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't get saved. I didn't think you should think it. And I was about 15, and I'd started to date, so I was sinning. So I thought, I've got to be saved here. But finally, I decided that if God wasn't going to save me, I could at least dedicate, and some other kids in the church had been doing this, dedicate my life to God, and God would have to treat me well because I was doing the right thing. So we were singing one Sunday night, I Surrender All, for the 25th time with the altar call, and someone had to come up.
Yeah.
And finally I decided to hell with it. So I went up and dedicated my life to the Lord. And of course, everybody gathered around you, put hands on you. We had an associate minister at this church who had actually gone to seminary. His name was Raymond Butts. And Raymond told me that if I was going to be a minister, I needed to read books. So I read a lot of bad books. But I read a book by Nils F.S. Ferre, who was a Swedish theologian. It was called The Sun and the Umbrella. And it was a takeoff on Plato's Cave, in which he suggested that religion probably hid God more than revealed God. And I thought, that's probably true, so I would give it up. But I didn't want to tell my parents. But no one in my family had ever gone to college. Indeed, the only college people that we knew were the people that taught in school. Of course, I was working every summer, learning to lay brick, but I was destined to go to college. So,
at what point did your mother tell you the story about Hannah and your birth? Was this before you went to college?
Oh, yeah. I was probably 6.
For those who don't know the story of Hannah, you want to tell that story briefly and then how it relates to you?
The story is Hannah was not able to have children, and she prayed to God that if God would give her a son, she would give that son to God. So she got pregnant, and she had Samuel, the prophet Samuel, who was then given to God. And my mother did the same. That she was having trouble getting pregnant. She had me, and she told me that she had given me to God when I was about 6. I say that it was perfectly appropriate for her to do that, but did she have to tell me? I mean, that you and I are sitting here now because she told me when I was 6 she had given my life to God.
And did that become something that you ever resented, or is it just a fact of your life that you accepted, or what was that like for you?
I may have resented it sometime. By the time I was going to college, I decided most of the stuff is absolute crap. And I didn't consider myself a Christian anymore.
You actually say in your memoir that in undergrad days, you did not understand how an intelligent person could believe in God or be part of a religious tradition.
Right. And I would go to chapel because it was required. But Southwestern had about 400 students at that time. But there was a man there named John Score who was doing his PhD at Duke. And I became the philosophy major at Southwestern. And he gave me a 6-semester course on the history of philosophy.
Oh, wow.
So I was getting at least smart enough through that to think I didn't know enough to be an atheist, because I at least had gotten the idea that to be an atheist is quite an achievement because you have to know the God that you're denying. So I decided that I would go on to seminary.
Before we go to seminary, let me go back to home just a minute. So you're raised the son of a bricklayer. And when you think about the ways being raised the son of a bricklayer has shaped you, what are some of the key things that have stayed with you in that regard?
Habit. You need to learn the habits of the craft that you're being initiated into, and that it's craft. And you have to be initiated into it if you're going to do it well by a master craftsman, because you have to imitate the movements. People love to watch bricklayers work because you're not sure how we're doing it, because you throw the line down the course, you build your lead, and you cut the mud off your mud board and spread it along the course, and then you frog the mud and cut the head joint and put the brick on the mud, and you let it kind of float down to the line. What I've just done is give you an account of laying brick that has a vocabulary to it that you're not familiar with. Frogging the mud, you didn't know bricklayers frog the mud. You would have called the line a string. It's a line. So there's a whole language internal to the learning of lay brick that is not unlike how you got to learn to speak Christian. There's a language to being Christian that is intrinsic to the practices that make Christianity intelligible. So I've always found the initiation into the kind of work that a bricklayer does to be not a bad image for thinking about how to learn to be a Christian.
When you think about that early experience, or even as you begin to grow into adulthood, obviously your work has talked a lot about virtue. And if you think about acquired virtues, what would you say are some of the other acquired virtues that you've had to be intentional about developing in your life?
I think I've had to be fairly intentional about patience. In particular, patience toward people I don't like. I found it very hard, for example, to work for people I don't like. And that's called the modern university, where oftentimes people that I don't like want to take on positions that make it possible for them to tell me what to do. So learning to be patient in a way that recognizes that they may actually have something good that they represent is a big challenge for me.
Something that's been a major theme in your work, the sort of emphasis on seeking to tell the truth and seeking to find ways to subvert our own tendency toward self-deception.
Self-deception is such a tricky notion, though it possesses us. Self-deception, it's not self-lying. If it's lying, you know you're doing it, so it's not deceptive. Self-deception is always an invitation. For example, in this dialogue we're having together right now, for us to think and to live out a project of being smart in a way that we don't acknowledge it, that we become self-deceptive. So how to live in a way that you want to know the truth about yourself is a hell of a challenge.
So when you think about this kind of motif of telling the truth and subverting our tendency to self-delusion, why do you think that became such a significant emphasis in your work? You say at the end of the memoir, you don't do a lot of self-introspection, but I guess I'm asking you to do an introspection question about what do you think is the source of that in your history that became such an emphasis?
My mother drove me crazy. My mother was from dirt poor Mississippi. She was a workaholic. And she would say things like, "You be kind to Mr. Johnson because you never know when you'll need to use him." I mean, if you ever wanted to know what the injuries of class looked like, it looked like my mother. She came from just dirt poor Mississippi. Her father was cotton gin drunk. My father was a wonderful, kind, good man. And she ran his life, and she wanted to run my life. I think I loved my mother, but I sure as hell wanted to escape her too. I think you're brought up within a culture that says that you, of course, must be supportive of your parents, but you may find that you have some fundamental differences, and you don't want to bring those into the world because you want to live out the narrative that the world tells you is what makes you who you are.
Your experience of having to sort out how to narrate that drives your own kind of pursuit of truth-telling?
I think so. I mean, you take an example would be my father and the gun.
Yeah, would you tell that story? Just a reminder that Stanley is a committed pacifist, apart from which this story lacks its full poignancy.
One year, my father, who I loved deeply and was a wonderful craftsman and an extraordinarily kind man in a very rough line of work. Being around bricklayers doesn't exactly make you a gentleman. But
and his name was?
Coffee.
Coffee, yes.
Coffee.
Yeah, Coffee Hauerwas.
Coffee Hauerwas. One year during the winter for bricklayers, the weather makes it hard to work. And so my Uncle George, who was always into something, was into making a rifle. And he got my father involved in making a rifle. My father cut down the tree, laid the stock, set the sight, everything, 30-06 deer rifle. And when I would talk with my parents, when I was in New Haven, all Daddy wanted to talk about was making this gun, because that's what he had to do during the winter. We got home that summer, and of course, the first thing my father did was take that rifle that he had finished and put it in my hands. And I said, "Well, this is a beautiful gun, Daddy, but you understand someday we're going to have to take these things away from you people." Can you believe what a I mean, my father, he didn't say much, but he was obviously, I was beginning world, Yale Divinity School, that they couldn't understand. I mean, it's not that they couldn't understand it. They couldn't imagine what it would mean to be in New Haven, Connecticut, Yale. And my father, the gun was his life. I didn't get the complexity of the human relations that were present at that time. Years later, I was on a phone call with him, and Daddy said something about the gun, and he said, "I'm not sure what I'll do with it." And I said, "Don't worry, Daddy, I'll take care of it." And so when we were visiting my mother and father we got off the airplane, and my mother said, "Stanley, you can buy a gun case here and take the gun back with you." And my father was standing there, and all I could think of was, "Oh, I don't want a gun in my home." But I couldn't do anything but take the gun. So I had the gun for some time, and I have a former graduate student who's from Montana who hunts elk. So I gave him the gun, and he knows the story. And so those kinds of complexities. I was truthful with my father.
Right.
Someday we're going to have to take these things away from you people. I said the truth, but I could have said it in a way that gestured to my father that I understood this gun is how much he loves me. But I didn't know how to do that.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our conversation with Stanley Hauerwas. I love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. You can get show notes for this episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in this episode, as well as a PDF of my complete interview notes and a full transcript. We would be most appreciative if you'd go to your favorite podcast app and write up a glowing 5-star review of No Small Endeavor, because those reviews help extend the reach of the beauty, truth, and goodness we are seeking to sow in the world. Coming up, Stanley discusses what he sees as the dangers of being a Christian and the difficulties of his first marriage to his wife, who suffered severe mental illness.
Hey there, I'm Dr. Maya Shankar, and I'm a scientist who studies human behavior. Many of us have experienced a moment in our lives that changes everything, that instantly divides our life into a before and an after. On my podcast, A Slight Change of Plans, I talk to people about navigating these moments. Their stories are full of candor and hard-won wisdom. And you'll hear from scientists who teach us how we can be more resilient in the face of change. Listen on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
So do you think that, and I'll put it in scare quotes, being religious makes us more or less prone to self-deception?
I think I'm going to avoid the word being religious.
Okay.
I think being a Christian can be a very dangerous business because it's an invitation to self-righteousness that can be extremely destructive, both for the person that's self-righteous and for those that they come in contact with. I'm not a pious person. God isn't just there for me in the way it is for other people that I know. I think I'm not pious partly because I don't trust piety. It can make us unaware of what it means to live well, insofar as the piety makes us enjoy too much the habits necessary to be a Christian. So I guess I'm saying that, of course, being a Christian can produce people who scare the hell out of me. Partly, I think, Lee, that question is to be answered at different context of when it was assumed in this country that almost everyone was, quote, a Christian. That's when being a Christian is really dangerous because it legitimates claims of righteousness that fail to see that the first thing that you learn as a Christian is how to confess your sin. So, in response to the question is, here we are, people that every Good Friday gets to shout, crucify him, crucify him. That's who you are. That should at least make possible a more critical understanding of oneself than celebratory exemplars that we seem to be surrounded by right now.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to separate that kind of question from the political situation we're in right now. Where in the hell did these, quote, evangelical Christians come from? Do you know?
For a lot of people, I think, looking on who don't understand the Christian world, there seem to be kind of two options. There's the evangelicalism you just pointed to, or there's Protestant liberalism, and then there's the Catholics. But in terms of the kind of the Protestant spectrum, you're clearly neither one of those.
Right.
And so could you, in lay accessible terms, describe how you are neither one of those?
I'm not a follower of either because, one, I don't think you get to make Christianity up. I think you receive it through the exemplification in people who live in a way that scare you. I'm thinking of people like John Deere, who has driven his Jesuit brothers crazy because of his commitment to peace. I think of people like Dorothy Day, Peter Martin. It's hard to be a Christian that tries to live out what you've learned from them. It's hard to be a Christian in support of something called America, which is a country that prides itself on being different. But the difference turns out to be prideful. I don't see how you can say Christian nation and at the same time say Jesus is Lord. So I try to help myself and others recognize what loaded things we say as Christians and how the implications may have remarkable outcomes in ways that evangelicals betray. I just don't know the evangelical world, but what I know of it, I dislike intensely. The last thing one should want is a personal relationship with Jesus. That's letting yourself control what Jesus is. When I say you don't get to make Christianity up, you don't get to make Jesus up. It's interesting how liberal Christianity, which I clearly am not, is very similar to evangelical Christianity. They both depend upon accounts of experience as an individual that I think is deeply problematic.
Which goes back to your earlier conversation about craft and bricklaying, I guess.
That's right.
Is that you're calling us to consider an account of Christian faith that trains us in language, a way of life, a way to do this, not that.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm, quote, post-liberal. And what it means for me to be post-liberal is my commitment to trying to help us recognize what it means for Christianity to be a communal faith. And Protestant liberalism takes many different forms, and some of it I've been deeply shaped by it. But I have this mantra that modernity is a time that produced people that believed they should have no story except the story they chose when they had no story. That's, of course, the production of the individual as part of the democratic process. But it also has shaped accounts of Christianity that thinks that I get to make up my mind about what I believe about Jesus. I think you don't get to make up your mind. You got to learn to hold the brick right, to lay it. I think that Protestant liberalism, presumption that you get to make up your mind about Jesus, was a deep mistake.
Another chord that runs through Hannah's child is your marriage to your first wife, Anne. You say, on December 29, 1962, I got married. That's about as much thought as I put into that decision. Only God knows what I thought I was doing. Of course, I thought I was in love. I know I was at least in lust. We were supposed to be married the summer after my first year in seminary, but I was lonely. And then you go in and say, we were married in San Antonio. We drove straight to New Haven and into hell.
Right.
It was not hell at first. It just worked out that way.
Right.
Would you unpack some of that for us?
Anne was very smart. Her mother forced her to major in Christian education at Southwestern. She hated it. She could be quite endearing, but she had no use for Christianity. She started being somewhat erratic, and I had no sense of what that was. There was anger there. She wanted a baby, and we had Adam, and early on, I think she was a fairly good mother, particularly when we were still in New Haven. Then we moved to Rock Island to be at Augustana, and she started having funny physical problems. Couldn't figure out what was wrong, why she was having pain. We went to South Bend, and we had a good life, I think, early on. We bought a house, and Adam was flourishing. Then suddenly, I got a call from a lovely man in the art department. She was taking a course in drawing. And he said, I'm not sure, but something's wrong. Anne just came in and propositioned me.
So at the time you're teaching at Notre Dame, and this is a colleague at Notre Dame who's calling you about
right.
proposition by Anne.
And I went home, and she was wild. First time you're around someone that's in a psychotic episode, it's a bit surprising. You don't know what's going on.
Stanley called a psychiatrist who agreed to see Anne, but she would have to come to the hospital, he said.
I had to call a graduate student because she wouldn't leave the house unless there was someone there to receive a message from God who was going to give her the clues to save the world. I remember we were sitting there in this room, very bare room. I was trying to convince her that what she was saying was crazy. That we had holes in our body that if we just drank enough water, our bodies would disappear and we would be able to save the world. And Dr. Schreiner wasn't saying anything. And finally, he said, I can see you've had some very important insights. And she said, yes, I have. And he said, but right now things are not good. your husband's there in a pile of tears and so on. Would you let me give you something that would help you sleep? She hadn't slept in 2 or 3 days. And she said yes.
Stanley drove her to the hospital to be admitted into the affective disorder clinic.
That was real hell, because then she always said, "You're making me crazy. I'm okay." She would then have a psychotic episode every couple of months, if not more. And that's what I lived with for 15 years.
Eventually, Anne left Stanley. He was always adamant about his dedication to his commitment of marriage, and I asked him if he sees any irony in his seemingly virtuous intentions potentially causing more pain for him and Anne.
I don't think I would have done anything different today. I mean, you don't abandon people that you've been committed, you've taken vows to support. When she decided to leave, I was exhausted, and all I could do was say, "Okay, let me do what's necessary," because I was worn out, and she finally just died of congestive heart failure. It's very sad. I mean, it's just a sad life.
You said at one point, after you all were separated and a divorce was finalized, I continued to go to counseling because I knew the years with Anne had created some scars. I did not want those scars to determine my life. Do you feel like you were successfully able to navigate working around some of those scars, or what's that been like?
I think I'm still a bit too ready to please those that are close to me to ensure they will love me. I mean, just as I kept trying to please Anne, those are habits that continue. There's still too much of my mother in me who always wanted to do something for you, so you would do something for her. I still think those habits are something that I need to be careful with.
Stanley is now happily remarried for many years to Paula. We're going to take a short break, but coming right up, the stigma of being Stanley Hauerwas, and why friendship is essential to a good life, and a better question to ask yourself than, are you happy? Coming right up. Hey there! Did you know that we have a newsletter? Just imagine if you could have one of your favorite ethics professors send you a list of things to reflect on, think about, practical actions with which to experiment, all on your way to sorting through what it might mean to live a good life. Well, that is the NSC Notebook. I riff on themes and topics related to the show and our guests. Sign up for my NSC Notebook today at nosmallendeavor.com/newsletter. There is a sort of stigma, I'll say, being attached to Stanley Hauerwas.
Yeah.
Even to the point, I would say, at times where it can contribute to a sort of marginalization. What's that been like for you?
Sadness. That first line that I use in Hannah's Child, I did not intend to be Stanley Hauerwas. There's a deep pathos to that, partly, because many of the people who don't like Stanley Hauerwas don't like that Stanley Hauerwas that I did not intend to be. Mm-hmm. But what that Stanley Hauerwas oftentimes is, I wouldn't recognize. But that's the Stanley Hauerwas, that's the stigma that's out there. I'm a person with strong convictions and hopefully strong arguments. And I'm not going to apologize for that. Many of the criticisms of me, he's a sectarian, pietistic tribalist. He hasn't written enough about race. He's anti-feminist. They're just all and it's just, you haven't read closely. I think I did not intend to be Stanley Hauerwas. The Stanley Hauerwas that's out there is often someone that people picked up not by reading, but by talking to someone else who doesn't like me. It's okay not to like me, but damn it, read what I've done before you make the criticism. And I know that when I say read what I've done, there's a hell of a lot of it. So I obviously don't like the stigma that comes from it, because I think people that turn it into a stigma don't have a sense of humor. I mean, my work is funny. It should be entertaining.
But the sadness I hear you expressing is not primarily directed at having been well understood and disagreed with, as much as not having had your work and words taken seriously and then mischaracterized.
That's right.
Yeah. There's a lot of chords running through your memoir, but one that stands out very prominent is just simply the theme of friendship. For a theologian, why friendship?
One, because wonderful people have claimed me, and I can't tell about my life without telling about how their lives have made a difference in my life. Secondly, I seem to have a gift for it. I just thoroughly enjoy friends. Thirdly, it's constitutive of the very way I think of the nature of the moral life. That Aristotle in Book 10 says, all the societies he knows except Sparta no longer form people through the law, but we can do what the law was meant to do, that is, shape our lives more morally by friendship. So friendship becomes the politics necessary for us to be a people capable of sustaining our lives truthfully. And friends are absolutely essential for having some self-knowledge. Aristotle said, crucial is to be your own best friend. He knew nothing of the egoism, altruism alternative. You are to be your own best friend, which makes it possible for you to be friends with others.
What does a good friendship look like for you?
Enjoyment at sharing a beer, being pulled by one friend to discover another friend, to enjoy watching a baseball game together, to discover that we've read the same thing and we have different views about what we've read. I should have said this early on, a good meal together. Eating together is always a sign of deep friendship. Having a common enemy is a mark of friendship. For the friend to tell you what you shouldn't do, for a friend to introduce you to an activity that you had no use for until the friend helped you see what it was you were doing, and so on. So, I mean, the qualities of friendship are almost endless.
You say, for years I think I feared happiness, but now I was happily married, and being so made me happy.
Yeah.
Have you made good progress in learning to be happy?
I don't know. I find times of being with friends in a way that you don't even notice how much you like one another or how much you need one another. I think I'm pretty good at that. It's not something you try to do, it's something that happens to you. Mm. And having a good time is when you don't have to try too much.
Right. I heard you a few years ago give a lecture, and I don't know if you've published this. You probably have, but I didn't look it up. You told a story about some Oxford-trained poet who then went back to become a shepherd.
Oh, yes.
Would you tell that story?
Yeah. It's called A Shepherd's Life, I think. He was raised by his grandfather and father, both of who were shepherds. And he just hated school. It was in Scotland. And he left school as soon as he could and took up the life of a shepherd. He loved to read, and he read just book after book. And then he took a course in the Open University, so was continuing education more or less. And the teacher, and he would write papers, and the teacher was mightily impressed by his writing. He could do that because he was such a reader. And she convinced him that he ought to go to a university. And he applied to go to Oxford, and they admitted him. And he did brilliantly there. And he could have gone on to further the education, but he decided to go back and to be a shepherd. And he was more or less taking over from his grandfather. And he talks about all the things you need to know to be a shepherd, like the teeth of a lamb and so on. And he takes you through the bargaining that the shepherds go through. And he ends the book by, he goes out and he's got his 2 dogs, and he lets his sheep out into this rough, rocky area. And his sheep have been bred to deal with rough, rocky areas. And he lays down in the grass beside a stream, and his dogs come up beside him, wondering what in the hell is going on, because they rarely see him lay. And he's laying there looking up at the clouds. And he says, "This is my life. I want no other." And I use that to say, how is it possible for most of us to be able to say, "This is my life. I want no other"? I think I can pretty well say that about my life. But it's a big challenge, isn't it? This is my life. I want no other. It's a better way of putting it than, "Are you happy?"
Yeah. Well, Stanley, I know that my life and my vocation has been profoundly shaped by you and influenced by you.
Well, you're very kind, and you will understand that when someone says that, it frightens you, because you also have people say that about your life. So thank you.
Well, I thank you. And I thank you for who you've been. Thank you for what you've tried to do. I thank you for the ways you have sought to practice honesty and truth-telling. And I thank you for the way that you sought to do that has a sort of lack of self-consciousness about it, I think, is one thing that I've appreciated so much. And I've just learned a lot from you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Part of learning is having friends that'll tell you to read this. And you've been one of those friends, Lee. So it matters a lot.
Thank you. Been great to be with you today.
I really enjoyed it.
You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with Stanley Hauerwas, theologian, author, and public intellectual. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion, and the support of the John Templeton Foundation, whose vision is to become a global catalyst for discoveries that contribute to human flourishing. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carrie Herman, Jason Sheasley, Ellis Osborne, and Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.